I can't remember exactly when I met Mike. As in the Labour Party, you meet so many comrades, so many friends, the exact date, the exact time. But I do remember specifically when I first heard his name, like some of the earlier speakers before I met him. And it was when Tariq Ali wanted to join the Labour Party. Many people remember that, rejoin it even. Another campaign we lost, but we'll come on to that one. He wanted to rejoin, and Jeremy took a couple of us round to Tariq's flat in Highgate to talk about what sort of support he would expect for his membership around the party, across the party. This was in Hornsey, later to become Hornsey and Wood Green. And we were talking about various names, and Tariq said, well, he said, there are a couple of young fellows in Highgate who you need to pick up on and who will actually be great help. Tony Graham and Mike Marqusee. So, Tony, thank you. Mike was the first mention I'd ever heard of him. I met him properly. I got to know him in the ward I represented all those years ago in Hornsey Vale. And that was the start of a 30-year friendship, which obviously in the Labour Party and latterly out of the Labour Party, but didn't break at all because, as somebody said earlier, it wasn't just friendship, there was comradeship. And through all those years, Mike's energy, enthusiasm, organisation was true comradeship in everything we did. What I have to say, it has to be tied to the Labour Party. I could reminisce on a number of other factors, so I will do my best, be partial memories, partial concerns, and concentrate mainly on those years when we worked together in Hornsey Vale, as Jeremy said, the centre of radicalism in Haringey, which is hard to believe now when how often do you see Haringey mentioned anywhere or even talked about, was actually on the front pages of national newspapers regularly for the terrible, awful things that we were doing in the name of the Labour Party. The first thing to say on that, of course, and Mike would be the first to chide me for not saying this, is it wasn't just Mike who was organising, energising, enthusing everybody. Certainly wasn't me as the councillor. It was a ward effort, and there were a number of comrades there. Some are still with us today, including at the back there, the leader of the Labour group on South Hams in Devon, for those of you who don't know, Labour group on their South Hams District Council. Unlike my own experience as leader of Haringey Council, he is the only member of the Labour group and therefore has no problem in dissensions, splits or right-wing backlashes. But David there is typical of the people in Hornsey Vale at the time, Irene, his wife, other old comrades who all worked so hard for everything that made Haringey what it was. Mike and I also, of course, worked a lot in Labour briefing. People will be speaking later, I think, on Labour briefing. Everyone remembers that as well. We were not members of Labour briefing, of course, because those Labour Party members here who can remember this will recall that to be a member of anything could lead you to be expelled not only from that particular group, from the party itself. Do you remember all that millions of comrade person hours wasted by Kinnock? And if I may quote Mike's friend, Randy, that damned arsehole, Kinnock. And the time and the money, the Labour Party effort that should have gone into opposing the terrible early 80 years that Clara spoke about earlier, wasted in pursuing a few militants around the country and anyone else who dared to think that we could actually oppose the Tories from the left. Sorry, my mouth is getting terribly dry. It's the prostate tablets I'm having to take. Do excuse me. And in briefing, Haringey Labour briefing nationally, we got involved in a whole range of campaigns locally. The rate capping campaign. Oh, bless you. Thank you. The rate capping campaign. Who remembers that? The 30th anniversary. Hilda. Something the focus round. Something we were good at. We were going to win. Mike Marqusee was in the middle of that. Everything he could bring to it, he did. The writing of the leaflets, the meetings, bring in not just that overused word, the community, but all the local groups, whatever. Anyone who was interested in, believed in, received help from, used local services, he would be there meeting them, bringing them in, getting this campaign going. Again, a campaign that we should have won from the left to oppose Thatcher and her minions. What did we get instead from that man? The dented shield. Better a dented shield. And look where we are now. One of the results of the rate capping campaign, the failure, again, I'm afraid, of the rate capping campaign, Bernie Grant became the leader of Haringey Council, and I was privileged enough to be elected as his deputy. Now, we all remember Bernie. He was a great man. He was a great loss. And it's terrible that Mike, like Bernie, should leave us so early when we need them now more than ever. Bernie's one problem, if he had a problem at all, was that he could sometimes speak before fully engaging what it was he was going to speak about. And whilst Mike was inspiring us all, writing all the stuff, urging people along, total support for Bernie, particularly after Broadwater Farm. Complete support for Bernie and his leadership for what he did. Bernie got it into his head somewhere down the line that because Mike was an American, he must be a CIA plant. Now, again, we're all old enough to think back to these things, and somewhere at the back of all our minds, we all know, we have all had this. Do you know, there might just be something in this latest crackpot idea that we, or he, or she, are not quite what you say you are. There's absolutely no question with Mike, as we know that. And Mike got his own back on Bernie on this one with his other great love, or one of his other many, many great loves, as you say, was cricket. In the first and last Hornsey Labour Party against Tottenham Labour Party cricket match, he bowled Bernie Grant for a duck. Probably the one ball of the over that actually fell on the wicket. So surprised Bernie, after us, all the others, that was the end. But anyway, Mike's support for Bernie at that terrible time was unremitting and consistent. The 86 local election campaign we went into on the back of Broadwater Farm, so it was obviously going to be very difficult. We also went into it on a positive images campaign. Again, a term, thank you, Hilda, that very few of us remember without thinking again of Mike's input in that one. And the work that was put in, and the trouble that we had, the threats a lot of us received for doing it, the starving vicar. Now, people outside Haringey probably didn't get that far, but he was a man of the cloth who promised not to eat until we had dropped the positive rights for gays and lesbians. He didn't die. I strongly suspect he probably came out eventually and is now serving a parish somewhere in the Antipodes. Jeremy is hovering. I will leap 3 pages to the personal reminiscences very briefly. The references to the books, not only, Anyone But England. The first one, Slow Turn, I always thought he really should have written more crime thrillers. They didn't have to be on cricket. He would have done a wonderful one about a murder in the Labour Party. Please, no nominations for the victim. The book on Dylan and so on, not his final book. The book that is relevant today, apart from the last one, and I really, if you would mind, Jerry, if I didn't mention this, because it is a gloomy time for the Labour Party, a desperate time. The reason I've kept this jacket on in this heat is to demonstrate this old badge that was thrown aside when the Red Rose was brought in. But not just because it's the badge, but because my granddaughter said I should wear it. And my granddaughter last year, totally without our knowledge, without her telling us anything about it, along with 2 of her friends, joined the Labour Party, which made me think, they're 17, there has to be some hope somewhere in the party if people of her age are quite willing to join it and work their socks off in the campaign that we've just had. She read, might have inspired her to join, might have put her off, I don't know, but she read the book now of Mike's that is most relevant, Defeat from the Jaws of Victory, that absolutely brilliant piece of work that he produced with Richard Heffernan, explaining exactly why that damned arsehole threw it away then in 92, and exactly what we shouldn't do if it ever happened again. And it is happening again. I'm not saying we threw away the victory. It was always dodgy, given that we hadn't spent 5 years in opposition, just 5 years going on, well, maybe a cut here, maybe a cap there, you know, and so on and so forth. But the same hero, anti-hero of that book has returned, the Prince of Darkness, Mandelson. So, Mike, I'm sorry we're all going through it all again. I miss you like I cannot say. Thank you.
As you've probably gathered, the programme is getting slightly elongated, and so what we're going to do now is I'm going to read a message. Roland Rance is going to do 2 poems. We'll then have the break, and then all the other speakers will come after the break. The food is now being brought out ready for you to eat. The message I want to read is from a great friend, Graham Bash, who, with Mike, was incredibly active in briefing, and indeed Graham still is. And the message is a lovely one and very poignant. Farewell, Mike Marqusee. Farewell, Mike Marqusee, friend, comrade, always a point of reference for all my political work for the last 30 years. I first came across Mike when he was part of the Haringey briefing group in the 1980s. From the very first, engagement with him was a breath of fresh air, a shock to the system. He came into left-wing politics from an entirely different place, not just geographically, from anything I'd ever come across. Before I met Mike, my assumptions, arguments, disagreements were based on differing interpretations of the Trotskyist heritage of which I was and remain connected. But here was someone totally different, a Marxist, socialist, revolutionary who had come from a very different tradition. I remember Mike in the 1980s, energetic, humorous, creative, and with a breadth of worldview of a scale I'd never come across. He was the antithesis of the narrow world I had till then inhabited. What drew us all to Mike was the breadth of his vision and experience. He made us feel what the new world we were fighting for was actually a world we wanted to live in. In a place of joy, culture and learning, here was someone who was a revolutionary and who shared my love of cricket. Mike was a wonderful, loyal ally, and many of us know an incorrigibly difficult adversary. Energetic, painstaking, challenging he was. He spared no one, but he was hard on no one more than himself. We're entering a new political situation post-election, in which all previous assumptions and mantra are no longer sufficient. We need to reassess our road to socialism, how we will miss Mike, how important he would have been as we chart new paths forwards. And we do so, he will remain part of us. Farewell, comrade, brother and friend, from Graham Bash. And we now have 2 poems from Roland. Thank you, Roland.
I've been told by Liz that there's in fact only time for one of the poems. So unfortunately, I won't read a poem by Denise Levertov, who must have been the greatest Welsh, Ukrainian, Jewish Baptist feminist from my hometown of Ilford ever to have been a leader of the anti-Vietnam War movement in the United States. Unfortunately, it would have been appropriate, but this poem by Nazim Hikmet was apparently one of Mike's favourites. Nazim Hikmet was a Turkish communist who spent 12 years as a political prisoner and then 11 years in political exile. He paid seriously for his political convictions. Most of his work, unfortunately, is much too long to read here. This poem is the middle part of a triptych that he wrote in jail in 1948 on living. It's particularly appropriate. Let's say we're seriously ill, need surgery, which is to say we might not get up from the white table, even though it's impossible not to feel sad about going a little too soon. We'll still laugh at the jokes being told. We'll look out the window to see if it's raining, or we'll wait anxiously for the latest newscast. Let's say we're at the front for something worth fighting for. Say there in the first offensive, on that very day, we might fall on our face, dead. We'll know this with a curious anger, but we'll still worry ourselves to death about the outcome of the war, which could last years. Let's say we're in prison and close to 50, and we have 18 more years, say, before the iron doors will open. We'll still live with the outside, with its people and animals, strain, struggle and wind. I mean with the outside beyond the walls. I mean, however and wherever we are, we must live as if we will never die.
Thanks very much for everyone who's spoken in the first half. We have gone over time. I was a bit worried when Steve from Haringey Council had gone over his 5 minutes as far as 15 minutes and then just about got to 1986. That was a... But thanks. It's inevitable. Everyone's got so many brilliant things to say. There will be a 10-minute interval now, and then we'll start all over again. And there's plenty of stuff to eat and everything, so please start with that.